first see it in the mid-1500s. They developed something called the Ratio Studorum, the Jesuits, in their own colleges, which was competitive. And there were prizes and public gradings, and they were pitted against each other. But there wasn't yet coerced attendance, and they weren't age segregating. You came into the system when you did, and you competed against the people who were there with you. Then compulsory schooling starts in Prussia in 1717, and it's definitely a tool of political control. It's definitely intended to instill obedience and conformity. There's heavy religious indoctrination motivations into it, and patriotism to support the state's military and bureaucratic needs, but it's not yet competitively graded, and it's not yet age segregated. And then the first combination of the two comes in colonial contexts, where they were pushing the Indigenous children into school and forcing them to compete against each other with grading systems. And this was for Indigenous populations who were being colonized. And in some contexts, this was happening in the 1500s to 1600s with Jesuit and other mission schools in the Americas, Asia, and Africa. And this predates this kind of thing happening in home territories. In terms of the combination of the two, it predates home territory what I call C squared schooling, by like 100 to 150 years. And when you add in competitive schooling in home territories, it's like more than 300 years later. So this starts in the colonies specifically, right? Because it wasn't primarily meant to be educational. If you look at the history of some of residential schools, for example, they basically just taught religion and obedience. It was intended as a subtle mechanism of enculturation, or not so subtle. And if we look at the idea of encoding the religion into a new form that is this type of school, a single truth is revealed to a chosen people, which is then codified by a hierarchical authority, framing children and Indigenous people as inherently bestial or in a state of original sin, in need of salvation through schooling, with ultimate reward. A grade, straight A grades is a kind of heaven that you get at the end, attainable only through obedient compliance with the school's competitive hierarchy, which imitates very closely the religious model that they were also enculturating these people into at the time. This had a wonderful advantage for the colonizers because it made the people easier to control, and it selected a small group of individuals who could then be elevated and receive privileges to become the intermediaries and local enforcers, while the rest would be converted into trained labor for extractivist purposes, while being indoctrinated to see their misery as an expression of their own unworthiness, rather than as a result of systematic oppression. Then the final component that took it from being C squared to C cubed is the age segregated cohort. Now, when did this come in? I was very curious to see. This came in the mid-1800s in Prussia. So now this is in a home territory. So now why are they bringing in now these two C's to a home territory and adding the age segregated cohort? And the reason basically was to create a nationwide pipeline for military conscription, right? You've got this cohort coming in and going through the structured process and coming out at a predictable time after a predictable process that's now ready to go on to the next stage, and they've already learned obedience. So centralization, mass coordination, predictable cohorts, habituation to hierarchy and obedience, transformed learning into a regimented year-by-year progression, which mirrored and enculturated military drilling and bureaucratic ranking. By fixing children into unified batches, measuring them against identical timetables, and advancing them through a system designed for control rather than curiosity, the other thing that they did, if you look back at cards, is that they brought together those 3 C's of compulsion, competition, and age-based cohorts to complete the subsumption of infinite education into finite training, because you can no longer allow things like critical thinking and individual growth and innovation once you have this combination of the 3 C's. I now call this 3 cubed, and if you notice, a cube makes a box. This is when education got squashed into the box that we came to see as compulsory schooling. And it was designed to produce populations habituated to hierarchy, obedience, and performance-based valuation, turning school into the perfect tool to optimize a nation's capacity for war and colonial expansion. So then I had to test my hypothesis by having a look at the timeline. And I believe that this model is what made World War I logistically viable.